Judge Grayson assumed he was about to sentence another criminal, until the defendant began methodically dismantling the prosecution's case like a trained attorney. The atmosphere inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt heavy, nearly stifling. The gallery was packed with spectators quietly whispering among themselves as the events unfolded. At the defense table stood a young man who looked small compared to the imposing furniture, his hands tucked in his pockets, his chin raised just enough to signal confidence rather than fear. Jalen Dawson, age 19, faced charges of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The accusations were serious, but the expression on Judge Walter Grayson's face made it clear this trial wasn't just about law, it was personal. Grayson reclined in his chair, his fingers tapping slowly on the polished desk. He looked at Jalen over the top of his glasses, his mouth curled in something between a grin and a smirk. "Think you're a legal expert, do you?" he said dryly. "This isn't debate club, kid." A few laughs spread across the room, from the bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. They were all in on the joke. Jalen didn't respond. He wasn't smiling. He had spent years preparing for this. Not this exact scenario, but the courtroom was as familiar to him as his own home. While other teenagers memorized basketball stats, he was studying legal rulings. While friends played video games, he imagined himself in court, arguing hypothetical cases. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a paralegal for over 2 decades. Jalen grew up on her stories, how some prosecutors cut corners, how some judges favored certain sides, how some defense attorneys barely put in the effort. He absorbed every word. By age 14, he could analyze a courtroom procedure better than most first-year law students. But to Judge Grayson, none of that mattered. To him, Jalen was just another troubled youth. "Let's move this along," Grayson said, opening the file. "I've got a tea time at 2. The gallery chuckled again. But this time, something shifted. Jalen let out a faint smile, barely noticeable. Grayson had just made his first mistake. No one else in the room caught it. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington stood with confidence, the kind that comes from reciting the same arguments many times before. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly in place. "Your Honor," he began, "the state will show that Jalen Dawson was caught in possession of a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported stolen only hours before his arrest." Carrington went on to describe a police pursuit through downtown LA, ending with Jalen's capture. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. "The evidence is clear," Carrington said. The gallery stirred. On the surface, it sounded undeniable. A stolen car, a pursuit, fingerprints. Grayson looked over his glasses at Jalen, then nodded at Carrington to continue. Carrington approached the jury. "The defense may suggest this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But ask yourself, what kind of innocent person runs from the police?" The room grew tense. Grayson leaned forward, resting his head on one hand. Jalen remained still. Carrington shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, we have the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who claims to have personally seen the defendant behind the wheel before the arrest. The vehicle was confirmed stolen and the arrest was by the book." Grayson nodded slightly. "Seems pretty clear." Most in the courtroom likely agreed. The case appeared straightforward. A stolen car, fingerprints, a pursuit. But Jalen had seen too many trials not to notice gaps. Still, he said nothing. He waited. Grayson tapped his gavel. "Let's hear from the defense." He turned to Lisa Thornton, Jalen's public defender, who had barely spoken since entering the courtroom. She stood nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen gently touched her arm, a silent gesture. She paused, then sat. Jalen stepped forward. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The courtroom went quiet. Grayson stared at him, amused. "You'll what?" "I'll represent myself," Jalen repeated, his tone steady. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The bailiff raised his eyebrows. Carrington's smirk briefly faded before he chuckled. This should be interesting. But when Jalen stepped forward, The tone changed. The room grew still. He stood centered, composed, letting the silence build. Then he spoke. Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to clarify something with the prosecution. Carrington folded his arms. Go ahead. You said Officer Ruiz personally witnessed me driving the vehicle, correct? That's right, Carrington replied, disinterested. And that's written in his report? Of course. Jalen nodded and turned to the judge. I move to have that testimony dismissed. Grayson frowned. On what grounds? Jalen removed his hands from his pockets, pointing to the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz didn't see me in the car. He wasn't even on duty when the chase started. Carrington's expression shifted. What are you talking about? If the court permits, Jalen continued, I'd like to request access to Officer Ruiz's GPS records from that night. If he was where he said he was, his location history should confirm it. But I believe it won't. The gallery stirred. Grayson turned toward Carrington. Counselor? Carrington hesitated. That report was filed by a sworn officer, Your Honor. Are we really going to question that based on a defendant's claim? Jalen shrugged slightly. If he was where he claimed, then the GPS data will verify it. If not, Grayson stared at Jalen, then addressed Carrington. Does the prosecution object to producing the GPS data? Carrington paused just long enough for everyone, the jury, the gallery, and most importantly the judge, to notice. After a moment he shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already occurred. The room that once laughed was now silent. The mood had changed. Carrington shuffled papers, his confidence beginning to slip. While we await the GPS records, he said, let's not forget, the defendant's fingerprints were on the steering wheel. Jalen nodded. That's true. He stepped forward again. But let's examine that evidence more closely. Grayson gestured for him to continue. Jalen turned toward the jury, meeting their eyes. The prosecution wants you to believe that my fingerprints on the car prove I stole it. But let's consider this logically. He paused briefly, his tone calm. Imagine, you're in a store. You try on a jacket, put your hands in the pockets, zip it up, then hang it back. Later, someone shoplifts that same jacket. Would your fingerprints make you the thief? Some jurors exchanged glances. A whisper came from the gallery. Jalen pressed on. The car was parked outside a 7-Eleven earlier that day. I was there with 3 friends. We walked by, and I leaned against the car, even opened the door since it was unlocked. I didn't steal anything. I didn't drive it. I didn't even enter the car. It was just a dumb moment of curiosity. He let that sit, then asked, clearly and directly, does touching something make you a criminal? Carrington shuffled his notes, searching for something to regain control, but Jalen wasn't done. And while we're discussing it, he continued, let's talk about how the fingerprints were processed. He looked back to the judge. Your Honor, was the forensic analyst subpoenaed to testify? Grayson blinked, clearly caught off guard, and glanced toward Carrington.